Imagine firing a live bazooka at the United Nations headquarters in New York City.
I mean, just picturing that today is completely wild.
Right, it's insane. And then imagine following that up by planting an actual bomb in the bustling Manhattan offices of a major publishing house.
Which is, exactly what happened.
Yeah, in the late 1960s, both of those things actually happened. And the target wasn't a military base or like a political leader.
No, it was a book.
Exactly, a book, specifically a diary. Because it turns out that in the high-stakes world of Cold War intelligence, a physical assassination is often just step one.
Yeah, killing the person is only half the battle.
Right. To truly win, you have to capture their private diary, heavily edit it, and literally secretly get into the publishing business to totally rewrite their legacy.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that ambition. I mean, we usually think of culture and academia and publishing as these realms of total freedom, right?
For sure. Like a vibrant marketplace of ideas.
Exactly. A marketplace completely separate from state power. But the historical record we're looking at today suggests those realms were actually weaponized. They functioned as a highly controlled, invisible empire.
And that invisible empire is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're joining us.
It's a really incredible topic.
It really is. Today, we are unpacking the historical claims and the documentary evidence laid out in Gabriel Rockhill's book, Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism? The Intellectual World War.
A heavy title, but a fascinating read.
Definitely. And our mission today is to pull back the curtain for you. We want to understand how the Cold War was fought, not just with spies and, nuclear standoffs, but with philosophy, with avant-garde art.
And universities and international publishing houses.
Yes. Now, real quick, before we dive into these incredible historical files, I need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
This is an important caveat.
It is. The source material we're looking at contains highly politically charged arguments. It touches heavily on capitalism, imperialism, communism, all the big ones.
All the heavy hitters.
Right. So our goal today is absolutely not to take a side.
No, not at all.
And we are not endorsing the author's political viewpoints. We are purely here to impartially unpack the historical events and the strategic mechanisms that are detailed in this research.
That is a crucial baseline for our discussion. We are essentially analyzing the mechanics of how information and ideology were managed by state intelligence.
Sort of looking at the architectural blueprints of psychological warfare.
Exactly.
So let's go back to that wild publishing story involving the bazooka. We are talking about the battle for Che Guevara's head.
Such a crazy story.
It really is. So after Che was assassinated in Bolivia in 1967, the U.S. government and its allies had a massive public relations problem on their hands.
Because the man was dead, but the idea of him was becoming a global myth.
Right, he was becoming a martyr. And to kill the myth, the battleground shifted entirely to his captured Bolivian diary.
Yeah, the Bolivian dictator at the time, René Barrientos, seized that diary right off Guevara's body, and he immediately rushed copies to the CIA and the Pentagon.
Because a diary is an incredibly dangerous artifact in a geopolitical struggle.
Oh, absolutely. In its raw form, it humanizes a figure. It gives you this unfiltered access to their motivations.
Right, makes them relatable.
Exactly. So an intense scramble began to control how that primary source document would be presented to the global public.
And they couldn't just bury it, right? Because rumors of its existence were already leaking out.
No, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So they decided to doctor it.
Wow.
Yeah, a publisher named Saul Stein stepped in to handle the English release.
And Stein, according to the research, had been on the CIA payroll, right?
Yes. He had a history of collaborating with psychological strategy boards. So he published a version that was edited by a writer named Daniel James.
Who was another documented CIA collaborator.
You got it. And the real weapon here wasn't necessarily changing the diary entries themselves, it was the packaging.
Ah, the packaging.
Yeah, James wrote this sprawling, nearly 60-page introduction that completely reframed the man.
Instead of a committed guerrilla tactician, what did they paint him as?
The introduction painted Guevara as this washed-up, failed romantic.
The psychological framing there is just brilliantly insidious.
It really is.
Yeah.
By controlling the introduction, they preemptively colored how every single reader would interpret the pages that followed.
Right. You read the intro and your bias is set.
Exactly. The introduction argued that Guevara was completely lacking in military ability. It claimed he was just a disgruntled elitist who secretly missed his chauffeur-driven limousines.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and his comfortable upper-class living. It suggested his entire Bolivian campaign was just a desperate chase for fame because he was terrified of being forgotten by history.
That is deliberate character assassination.
Completely. It targets the core appeal of the revolutionary myth, the idea of selfless sacrifice, and replaces it with vanity and incompetence.
But the other side realized exactly what was happening, and they fought back.
They did.
Fidel Castro, alongside a French journalist named Michel Rey, and Barney Rosset.
Oh, yeah, Rosset from Grove Press.
Right, the guy who ran Grove Press in New York.
Yeah.
They managed to secure the real, unedited diary.
And they rushed to publish that authentic version to counter the CIA's narrative.
And the backlash from anti-communist exiles over that was completely unhinged.
That's where the bazooka comes in.
Yes. The bazooka fired at the UN during an earlier speech by Che, which eventually culminated in the actual bombing of the Grove Press offices in retaliation for publishing the unedited diary.
It's just wild.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like a massive tech corporation not only neutralizing their biggest rival, but then covertly buying the rights to that rival's autobiography.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Just so they can write a foreword claiming the founder was actually a terrible coder who stole all his ideas.
That analogy captures the strategy perfectly. You don't just destroy the competitor, you destroy their intellectual credibility.
Yeah.
This entire operation is a textbook, localized example of psychological warfare. Physical military action almost never exists in a vacuum.
It needs a narrative.
Exactly. It requires a simultaneous battle for hearts and minds to sustain it. Consider the 1954 coup in Guatemala.
Which Che Guevara actually witnessed firsthand.
He did. The U.S. didn't simply overthrow the democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz just to protect the land holdings of the United Fruit Company.
Right.
They ran an exhaustive psychological campaign leading up to it, and it was orchestrated by a man named Edward Bernays.
Oh, Bernays is a fascinating figure all on his own.
Oh.
He was literally Sigmund Freud's nephew.
Yes.
And he essentially invented the modern public relations industry. He took his uncle's theories about the subconscious and just, applied them to mass media.
He did.
Yeah.
And he used those psychoanalytic principles to manufacture a narrative that painted Arbenz, who was basically moderate reformer, as this dire existential communist threat to the American way of life.
Wow.
By planting selective stories in the American press and shaping the media environment, Bernays primed the U.S. public to accept a violent coup as a necessary defensive measure.
So the psychological battle lays the groundwork for military assaults that would otherwise be rejected by the public.
Exactly. And crucially, it provides moral cover after the fact. The publishing war over Che's diary is an extension of that exact same strategic doctrine.
So if you can successfully assassinate a revolutionary's character to neutralize his followers, the next logical question for intelligence agencies is, why wait for a revolutionary to appear at all?
Right. Why play defense?
Exactly.
Right.
Why not shape the global culture so these figures never gain traction in the first place?
And that realization brings us to the macro strategy built by the U.S. Psychological Strategy Board.
TSB.
The PSB. This is where the source material expands from tactical operations like a single book into the construction of a massive empire of ideas.
Okay, tell us about the PSB.
Well, the PSB was established in the early 1950s. It operated at the very highest levels of the U.S. government, and they pioneered a concept they called doctrinal warfare.
Doctrinal warfare.
Yeah, and it is vital to distinguish this from your standard short-term propaganda.
Like dropping leaflets over a battlefield.
Exactly, or broadcasting radio messages to enemy troops. Doctrinal warfare operates on a generational timeline.
Wow, generational.
It is about shaping the foundational worldview of the global intelligentsia. The objective is to establish what we might call an ideological gestalt.
Okay, an ideological gestalt.
Yes, basically setting the default parameters of reality.
Setting the default parameters. So creating a filter for the culture.
Precisely.
Like if you can get the journalists, the university professors, the novelists to internalize a specific framework, you never actually have to tell them what to write.
No, you don't.
They will automatically filter all future information through the lens you've already provided.
That is exactly it. If the foundational assumptions of the intellectual class align with your geopolitical goals, their independent output will naturally support your interests.
So you don't need to censor them.
No, censorship is messy. Their own worldview does all the heavy lifting for you.
That is wild. And this brings up one of the most surprising tactics the PSB recommended. It completely threw me when I read it.
It's very counterintuitive.
Very. The board explicitly recommended using Marxist terms and concepts to attack communism and defend Western society.
Yes.
Now wait, I need to stop you there and push back on behalf of the listener, because during the 1950s, we were at the absolute height of McCarthyism.
The Red Scare.
Yes, the Red Scare.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. government was dragging Hollywood writers and academics before Congress to destroy their lives for even being suspected of communist sympathies.
True.
Are you telling me that behind closed doors, U.S. intelligence was secretly funding and promoting certain types of Marxists? How does that make any sense?
I know, it seems like a massive contradiction. But strategically, it is a stroke of absolute genius.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the intelligence agencies were highly pragmatic. They looked at post-war Europe and realized they couldn't just magically erase leftist or anti-capitalist sentiments.
Because people had just been through a terrible war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those ideas were incredibly popular among the youth and the working classes who had just suffered through a devastating conflict.
Right.
If you try to outright ban a popular ideology, you often just radicalize its followers.
You push them directly into the arms of the Soviet Union.
Precisely. So instead of trying to destroy that energy, they sought to capture it, dilute it, and manage it.
They actively funded what they considered the compatible or respectable non-communist left.
Yes.
And the source material points to certain members of the Frankfurt School as prime examples of this, right?
The Frankfurt School is a perfect illustration. They were a group of highly influential academics and philosophers who critiqued capitalist society, but their work was intensely theoretical.
So they weren't exactly out there handing out pitchforks.
No, not at all. They focused on aesthetics, culture, and psychoanalysis. They weren't organizing labor unions or advocating for armed working-class revolutions.
So from the perspective of U.S. intelligence, this was an incredibly safe, compatible form of leftism.
Extremely safe.
It's an intellectual release valve.
Yes. By actively promoting a version of leftism that was highly academic, deeply critical of Soviet authoritarianism, and ultimately non-threatening to the core structures of Western capitalism.
They could safely funnel rebellious energy into a harmless intellectual cul-de-sac.
You got it. It fractured the radical left by elevating voices that use the language of the opposition to criticize the opposition.
Wow.
It is infinitely more effective to manage dissent by funding its most harmless critics than to try and banish dissent entirely.
That completely slips my understanding of the Red Scare.
It changes the whole picture.
But the logistics of this are boggling to me. How do you actually distribute that managed dissent? How do you feed government-approved philosophy to the masses without people realizing it's coming from a geopolitical intelligence agency?
Right. How do you keep the fingerprints off it?
Exactly. And to understand the mechanics of this, the source points us across the pond to the UK.
The British model provides the foundational blueprint for how this was executed.
Tell us about that.
Following World War II, the UK established a massive, secretly funded propaganda arm within the Foreign Office called the Information Research Department, or the IRD.
The IRD. And the CIA studied them closely, right?
Very closely. They use the IRD as a primary model for their own cultural operations.
And the scale of the IRD is staggering.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about a small basement office with a mimeograph machine.
Not at all. They employed between 400 and 600 professional propagandists.
That is a massive operation. And their primary mechanism wasn't publishing government newsletters, was it?
No, that would be too obvious. Their tactic was feeding state-authored, deeply researched anti-communist material directly to respected journalists at major independent outlets.
We are talking about places like Reuters and The Observer.
Exactly. Those journalists would take the IRD's research and publish it under their own names.
Okay, think about the psychological impact of that method.
It's huge.
If the British government releases a press statement denouncing a Soviet policy, the general public will naturally view it with skepticism, right? They recognize it as a biased state narrative.
Absolutely. But if a reader opens the Sunday edition of The Observer and reads an incisive, independent analysis by a journalist they trust, their defenses are down.
Completely down.
It creates the powerful illusion that a diverse range of independent media outlets are all organically coming to the exact same conclusions.
The public perceives a reasoned, independent consensus.
Completely unaware that the journalists are all singing from a hymn sheet drafted by state intelligence.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
The book details the involvement of George Orwell.
Yes.
Yes, the author of 1984. The man who literally burned the concepts of the thought police and the Ministry of Truth into the global consciousness.
The very same.
The source reveals that Orwell secretly submitted a list of suspected communists and crypto-communists directly to the IRD.
He did.
And he specifically gave this list to an IRD officer named Celia Kirwan, who he was actively romantically pursuing at the time.
It sounds like a spy novel, but it's historical record. And the intelligence apparatus was incredibly grateful for his cooperation.
I bet they were.
In return for his service, the IRD threw its massive institutional weight behind his literary career. They didn't just thank him, they weaponized his fiction.
How so?
The department bought the foreign rights to his books, they translated them into dozens of languages, and aggressively distributed them globally.
Wow.
They even stepped in to secretly fund the animated film adaptation of Animal Farm.
They funded the movie.
They did. They utilized vast state resources to ensure George Orwell became a global literary superstar because his fiction perfectly served their geopolitical narrative.
The irony is just breathtaking.
It really is.
I mean, a novelist writes 1984 as a dire warning about a dystopian Ministry of Truth controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And then he secretly utilizes a literal Ministry of Truth to boost his own book sales and cement his international legacy.
You couldn't write it better. And Orwell wasn't an isolated case. The text notes that prominent academics and historians like Robert Conquest and Brian Crozier heavily utilized IRD materials.
And in some cases worked directly for intelligence agencies.
Yes, all while presenting themselves to the public as completely independent, objective scholars.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we're observing here is the sophisticated mechanism of academic laundering.
Academic laundering, okay.
It functions exactly like money laundering, but the currency is information. In money laundering, you take illicit funds and run them through a legitimate business so they appear clean in the open market.
Right.
In academic laundering, you take state propaganda, which carries the dirty fingerprints of government bias, and you run it through an independent university professor or a respected novelist.
So by the time that information reaches the public, the government fingerprints are entirely washed away.
Exactly. It becomes accepted objective truth.
So the U.S. intelligence community watches this British model of academic laundering. They see how flawlessly it shapes public opinion, and they decide to supercharge it.
They really do.
They take the IRD blueprint and inject it with seemingly limitless American wealth. And this creates a covert apparatus so vast that insiders within the intelligence community affectionately referred to it as the mighty Wurlitzer.
The mighty Wurlitzer.
It's like the massive theater organ. It was an instrument capable of playing any tune they wanted anywhere across the globe.
And the crown jewel of this U.S. effort was an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, or the CCF.
Okay, the CCF.
Run out of Paris by a dedicated CIA operative named Michael Josselson. The CCF was an absolute cultural juggernaut. At its peak, it maintained offices in 35 countries.
35 countries.
Yes. They sponsored over 20 prestige literary and political magazines. They curated high-end art shows and organized massive academic conferences that gathered the world's leading intellectuals.
But obviously, the CIA can't just write a check with the agency seal on it to fund an avant-garde poetry journal in Paris.
No.
The paper trail would immediately destroy the illusion of independence.
Yeah.
So how did they hide the money?
This is where it gets incredibly systemic. They utilize the massive tax-exempt philanthropic foundations of the United States as front organizations.
Oh, wow.
The source specifically highlights what were known as the Big Three, the Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie Foundation.
The big ones.
The very biggest. And the sheer volume of capital involved is difficult to comprehend. To give you a sense of scale, the Ford Foundation alone held assets totaling $3.3 billion in 1960.
$3.3 billion. In 1960.
Yes. By funneling covert intelligence funds through these ostensibly charitable organizations, the U.S. government could secretly finance a vast global array of cultural and intellectual activities.
So to the recipient, the grant just looked like a generous philanthropic award.
Exactly. It didn't look like a covert intelligence subsidy at all.
And the list of prominent intellectuals who collaborated with these intelligence fronts, whether wittingly or unwittingly, is just jaw-dropping.
It is a who's who of the 20th century.
Right. The book points out feminist icon Gloria Steinem.
Yes.
She actually spent 4 years working as a CIA agent, operating through Youth Front, and she later publicly defended her time there, arguing that the agency's people were enlightened and liberal.
And then you have James C. Scott, a towering figure in anarchist political science.
An anarchist?
Yes. He admitted to writing reports for the CIA while stationed in Burma and working as an overseas representative for a student association that was secretly controlled by the agency.
Wow.
The research also highlights Emanuel Wallerstein, a highly influential sociologist. He served as vice president of the World Assembly of Youth, which was an international anti-communist organization secretly funded and deeply penetrated by both the CIA and French intelligence.
Okay, I have to pause here.
Yeah.
If I'm listening to this, my immediate thought is, wait a minute. Are we saying all these brilliant, independent minds, the leading feminists, anarchists, and sociologists of the 20th century, were just remote-controlled puppets on a CIA string?
That is a very natural question.
Like, were they sitting in cafes taking direct dictation from spies in trench coats?
No, and that is a critical distinction to make. The author's argument here is deeply nuanced. No, they were absolutely not mind-controlled puppets taking direct orders.
Okay, good. Because that sounds absurd.
Dictating content is too risky, it's too clumsy, and frankly, it produces inauthentic art. As the historical analysis beautifully captures, the intelligence agencies realized they didn't need to pull the strings of individual puppets. Instead, they simply chose to build the marionette theater itself.
They built the theater. That changes the entire paradigm.
Exactly. Why bribe someone to change their mind when you can simply fund someone who already agrees with you?
Wow.
They set up a structural system of values and rewards. If an intellectual naturally held views that were compatible with U.S. geopolitical interests, even if they genuinely considered themselves a radical leftist or an anarchist, they were suddenly showered with foundation grants,
Lucrative book deals.
prestigious academic tenure, international speaking tours.
So they just elevate the voices they like.
Yes. For instance, funding a prominent liberal feminist like Steinem was highly strategic. It showcased Western society as dynamic, tolerant, and progressive.
Creating a stark, appealing contrast to the rigid, censorious culture of the Soviet bloc.
Exactly. It won over the global youth.
While simultaneously, those who held truly incompatible views, views that threatened core economic or geopolitical interests, were quietly marginalized,
They were starved of funding.
denied tenure, excluded from the pages of the prestige magazines.
Yes. The intellectuals still exercised their own free agency. They wrote what they truly believed. But the overarching system artificially amplified certain beliefs while aggressively suppressing others.
So the marketplace of ideas wasn't free.
No. It was heavily curated.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener today? When you browse a bookstore or download a new deep dive to listen to or read the latest academic theory, we love to think we are participating in a completely free, meritocratic marketplace.
We assume the best, most truthful ideas naturally rise to the top of the cultural consciousness.
Right. But this deep dive into the historical record shows that sometimes that marketplace is heavily subsidized by invisible hands.
Very invisible, very wealthy hands.
The shelves are actively stocked by power structures that have a vested interest in making sure certain ideas are readily available, while others are starved of oxygen before they ever see the light of day. We started today talking about a doctor diary, a single book whose introduction was manipulated to change how a reader understood the world. But this history forces us to consider the possibility that our entire cultural bookshelf might be doctored.
And this raises an important question, and it's one I'd really like to leave you to mull over.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
If the intelligence agencies and foundations of the 20th century successfully mask their massive geopolitical goals behind avant-garde art, liberal feminism, and dense academic theory, what seemingly rebellious or independent cultural movements today might actually be quietly subsidized by modern power structures.
Oh, man.
If the marionette theater is still being built around us right now, what ideas are we being gently encouraged to consume to keep us distracted from challenging real power?
That is a thought that is definitely going to stick with me. The history of our culture and our knowledge isn't a clean, organic evolution.
Far from it.
It's heavily managed, brilliantly funded, and deeply complex. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading critically, always question the structural sources of your information, and we'll see you next time.